The parallel similarities of Greek mythology and Christianity. There are many comparisons and parallel similarities that can be said about Greek mythology and religion. Most people that are Christians or follow the principles of the Bible believe the stories told in the Bible itself. The same can be said about the stories of Greek and Roman mythology as well. The idea that many different gods and goddesses controlled the universe can be looked at as stories that are no more than fiction or fantasy. The same could be said about Christianity for non-believers. But majority of these biblical stories are accounts of important people, events, and concepts of Christian faith. Similarities can begin with creation stories, where in both the Christian creation story, Genesis, and in many accounts of the ancient Greek creation story, the earth began with darkness and nothingness, or chaos, Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, as known to the Greeks. Both heaven and Olympus are believed to have beliefs or prophecies that are very similar to each other. The overthrowing of rulers were frequent events in both Greek mythology and in biblical stories. In both cultures, these prophecies usually lead to the attempted suppression, usually murder in Bible stories of the group that the overthrow will supposedly come from. Mount Olympus was considered the residence of the divine family, the 12 most important ruling gods and goddesses of ancient Greece, who were also known as the Olympians. Some of the Olympians include Zeus, Prometheus and Pandora. They all lived together in an enormous palace, high above the clouds. Olympus is identified with Mountain Olympus in Thessaly, which is the highest mountain in Greece. It mostly is identified though as some mysterious region far above the earth. The book of Genesis contains two distinct creation accounts. Genesis chapter 1 depicts the origin of the cosmos in 7 days, while Genesis 2-3 portrays the creation of man, woman, and the Garden of Eden. Scholars have long recognized parallels between Genesis and ancient Near Eastern myths, especially from Mesopotamia. However, fascinating connections also exist between Genesis and ancient Greek creation narratives, particularly Plato's Timaeus. Genesis chapter 1 and the Greek demiurge. The creation account in Genesis chapter 1 bears a surprising resemblance to ideas expressed in Plato's Timaeus. Here, Plato describes how a divine craftsman or demiurge imposes order on pre-existing chaos to craft an orderly cosmos. The demiurge creates the physical world as an imitation of ideal forms. Likewise, in Genesis chapter 1, God creates by speaking elements of the world into ordered existence. The narrative style is logical and structured, almost scientific in tone. God evaluates his creative acts as good, echoing the reasoned, ordered process of crafting described by Plato. Both accounts lack dramatic action, anthropomorphism, or human-like portrayals of the divine. God and Plato's demiurge are transcendent, bringing rational order from primordial chaos. The Genesis chapter 1 account has a majestic, philosophical tone that mirrors Plato's cosmogony more closely than the lively myths of Near Eastern texts like the Enuma Elish, the Divine Council and the Greek Pantheon. Whereas Genesis chapter 1 depicts a single, all-powerful deity, Genesis 2-3 presents a divine council of multiple gods, similar to the pantheons of Greek myth. The opening verse of Genesis, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," employs the Hebrew Elohim, a plural noun. Elohim can designate the God of Israel along with his divine council. Psalm chapter 82 presents a dramatic scene where God presides over his council and condemns other gods for their unjust rule. This echoes Greek myths about the origins of the Olympians as descendants of primordial deities like Uranos, Gaia, and the Titans. The Greek pantheon also has a supreme ruler, Zeus, who presides over the other Olympians just as the god of Genesis commands the divine sons of Elohim. The plurality of gods in early Greek and biblical sources point to a shared ancient Near Eastern mythic T. Whereas Genesis chapter 1 seems philosophical, Genesis 2-3 adopts mythical tropes from Greek stories about the Golden Age and humanity's tragic loss of paradise. The abundant, beautiful Garden of Eden is reminiscent of Greek depictions of the earliest eras of human existence as agrarian utopias before later decline. The crafting of the first woman from the man's body in Genesis chapter 2 closely parallels Greek myths about divine beings modeling humans from clay, metal, or bone. Pandora's creation from clay and Athena's birth from Zeus's head are two examples that find echoes in Genesis chapter 2. The forbidden tree in Eden also evokes Greek myths about divine tests of human obedience involving trees, such as the golden apples in the Garden of the Hesperides. The tragic expulsion from paradise likewise reflects recurring Greek themes about mankind's fall from an ideal state at the dawn of creation. Demythologizing Genesis chapter 1, remixing myth in Genesis 2-3. Why does Genesis chapter 1 seem so philosophically refined compared to the vivid mythical tones of Genesis 2-3? One compelling thesis comes from Russell G. Merkin, who proposes Genesis chapter 1 deliberately demythologizes earlier creation narratives, while Gen 2-3 recasts those myths in a monotheistic light. In this view, Genesis chapter 1 corrects the divine plurality, anthropomorphism, and dramatic action of Near Eastern myths by elevating God to a single all-powerful, transcendent deity who creates through ordered speech. Genesis chapter 1 systematically critiques pagan myth. Yet Genesis 2-3 recasts similar myths in a veiled, monotheistic fashion, likely for metaphorical and literary purposes. The garden motif preserves resonant symbolic tropes about humanity's moral development while removing overt polytheism. This allows Genesis 2-3 to reuse evocative mythical themes and tropes in a theology centered on the supreme God. Conclusion. The creation accounts in Genesis incorporate both demythologized philosophy and artistic mythical remixing, bearing intriguing parallels to both Plato's orderly demiurge and Greek heroic tales of Paradise Lost. The Genesis accounts fuse biblical theology with the best of Hellenic philosophy and storytelling. Appealing to Greek sensibilities help make the Genesis narratives compelling and meaningful for early audiences across Near Eastern cultures. The deep resonances between Genesis and the Greek worldview further illustrate the